It was just another quiet Saturday morning when everything went sideways over something as simple as groceries. My wife had just come back from the store. Nothing out of the ordinary. A few paper bags, some bottled water, a box of cereal poking out the top. She parked right in front of our home, the same way we'd done every weekend for the past 3 years. She popped the trunk open and started unloading everything, one bag at a time. I was inside, half distracted by the game on TV. The sun was out, birds chirping, absolutely nothing that screamed, emergency. But apparently, that peaceful morning triggered someone's neighborhood alarm, and not the electronic kind. Across the street, standing behind her trimmed hedge like a guard tower lookout, was Karen. Not her real name, but you know the type. Every neighborhood's got one. Always ready to take notes, film with her phone, or slap a violation notice on your door for leaving your trash bins out 2 minutes too long. She wasn't just any HOA member, she was the president, self-appointed defender of suburban order. Now, let me be clear. My wife wasn't being loud. She wasn't blocking traffic. She wasn't doing anything strange. Just carrying groceries. But Karen squinted from across the street like she'd spotted a criminal mastermind. I didn't see it all happen, but my wife told me later that Karen watched for about 30 seconds, arms crossed, then pulled out her phone like she was defusing a bomb. She called 911. Not security. Not the HOA hotline. The actual emergency line. Over groceries. I didn't even realize what was going on until I heard the siren, getting louder, closer. I stepped outside just in time to see a sheriff's cruiser rolling slowly down the street, lights flashing but no siren blaring. Karen was already halfway down her driveway, frantically waving her hands like she just caught a fugitive red-handed. The deputy stepped out, hand on his belt, confused. You could tell from his body language that even he wasn't sure why he was there. Karen marched straight up to him, talking fast, pointing toward my wife. She kept glancing at our driveway like it held the evidence of a federal crime. My wife? She was just standing there, holding a watermelon, completely bewildered. I walked down to join them, and I could hear bits of what Karen was saying, suspicious activity, didn't recognize her, possibly casing the house. She was talking like my wife didn't live there. Like she hadn't been parking in that same spot for years. And the deputy, poor guy, tried to keep a neutral face, but you could tell he was already regretting this call. Then things got strange. Karen suddenly lowered her voice and said something to the officer. He leaned in closer. She pulled out a badge, not just any badge. One of those deep blue leather folders with the shiny emblem inside. My stomach dropped a little. I couldn't hear what she said, but I caught 3 words. Federal Counterterror Division. The sheriff froze. My wife raised an eyebrow, glanced at me, then calmly set the watermelon down on the hood of the car. Now here's the part Karen didn't expect. The badge she had? Not real. She'd bought it online during COVID, back when she believed the neighborhood was under siege from imaginary threats. It was all part of her self-made security fantasy. But there was one big problem. My wife works for the actual FBI. Not a wannabe. Not a pretend agent. She's got the real badge. The real credentials. Real clearance. And after a few seconds of awkward silence, she reached into her bag, pulled out her wallet, and flipped it open. The difference was obvious. One was a novelty prop. The other made the sheriff step back and adjust his stance like he'd just walked into a classified situation. Karen stopped talking. You could almost hear the wind change. The officer's entire attitude shifted. His tone dropped. His eyes darted from Karen to my wife, then back again. He asked my wife to confirm her name and position. She did, calmly, professionally. And right there on our quiet little street, a showdown that started over groceries turned into something way bigger, and way more embarrassing for Karen. She opened her mouth like she wanted to defend herself, but nothing came out. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Karen's mouth hung open for a second, like she was trying to come up with something, anything, that would explain what she'd just done. But there was no saving it. She had called 911 over groceries. She had claimed a federal threat. And now, standing on our driveway, she was face to face with a real federal agent. The sheriff slowly shifted his attention from Karen to my wife. "Ma'am," he said, more careful now. Can I just confirm where you live? My wife pointed to our house without hesitation. Right here, she said. Been living here for over 3 years. The officer looked up at the home, then at me. And you're the husband? I nodded. She's my wife. We shop every weekend, park right here, carry the bags in. Nothing unusual. Karen took a half step back, clutching her knockoff badge like it might save her. I thought she didn't belong, she stammered. She was acting strange. My wife turned to her and calmly asked, what exactly looked strange to you? The cereal? Or the tomatoes? Karen didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. The sheriff gave her a long look, the kind that says you just wasted a whole lot of everyone's time. Do you have any idea what happens when you flash a fake federal badge at an officer? He asked her, voice steady but serious. That question hit hard. Her eyes darted to the badge still in her hand. Her fingers slowly curled around it like she suddenly realized she was holding something radioactive. Now the mood had completely flipped. The sheriff, who had walked up thinking this might be a domestic situation or neighborhood dispute, now had a real concern on his hands, not about my wife, but about the woman who called it all in. Karen was breathing harder, trying to steady herself, her usual bossy confidence slipping away. It's not fake, she mumbled, not very convincingly. It's for volunteer work. I help with safety stuff. The deputy wasn't buying it. That's not how this works, he said. You impersonated federal law enforcement. That's a serious accusation. You claimed a false emergency. You misused 911. Karen's voice cracked. I was just trying to help the neighborhood. There have been break-ins lately and I thought. My wife cut in, her tone flat and professional. You saw a woman unloading groceries in her own driveway. Your first instinct wasn't to ask. It was to call the cops. And then try to act like you were one. At this point, a couple of our neighbors had stepped outside, curious about the cruiser parked on the street. Some of them had phones in hand. One lady whispered, "That's the HOA lady, right?" Someone else added, "What's going on? Did she get in trouble?" Karen noticed the small crowd. Her face turned red, not just from embarrassment, but from the realization that her carefully polished image as the neighborhood enforcer was starting to crack. She looked at the sheriff, probably hoping he'd smooth things over or quietly walk away. But he didn't. Instead, he asked her to hand over the badge. Her hands shook slightly as she passed it to him. He looked it over, opened it, examined the seal. Amazon special, he muttered. Then he radioed in something. I couldn't catch the exact words, but I knew it wasn't good for her. My wife stayed calm the whole time. She didn't gloat. She didn't escalate. She just stood there, arms folded, watching this whole drama unfold with the same level-headedness she brings to actual high-level operations. And that made it even worse for Karen. Because no yelling, no anger, just quiet confidence, made Karen look even more foolish. At some point, Karen turned toward me, like maybe I'd offer her a lifeline. You know I just care about the community, right? She said. I'm just looking out for everybody. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at the bags still sitting on the driveway, one with a receipt on top, clearly visible with the name of the local store and today's date. Maybe next time, I finally said, you could just say hello instead of calling the cops. Karen blinked, as if that idea had never occurred to her. Behind her, the sheriff called for another unit. If you're enjoying this wild HOA drama, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories that'll make your neighborhood feel calm. The second unit showed up faster than I expected. Another cruiser, pulling up beside the first, with a younger deputy stepping out. He gave a short nod to the first officer, glanced at Karen, then at my wife, and then at me, clearly trying to piece together what was happening. The first deputy didn't say much at first. Just handed him the fake badge Karen had flashed and said, "We've got a situation." Karen was trying to hold herself together, but you could see the panic rising in her eyes. She started fidgeting, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "This is all just a misunderstanding," she kept saying. "I didn't mean any harm." But it didn't matter how many times she said it. The more she talked, the worse it sounded. The second deputy looked over at my wife and asked, "Ma'am, are you in federal service?" Without a word, my wife pulled out her official credentials again and handed them over. This time, the younger officer took them carefully, inspected the seal, checked the ID and nodded. "Thank you," he said. "Everything looks in order." Karen took a small step forward, voice shaky but trying to sound in control. "I didn't know. I didn't recognize her. She wasn't wearing. She didn't look like an agent." That's when my wife, who had stayed cool and calm the entire time, finally let a little edge into her voice. "So what does an agent look like to you, Karen? Because I've lived here longer than you have. And you've never once introduced yourself." Karen opened her mouth, then shut it. The second deputy asked her a new question, this time more direct. "Where did you get this badge?" She stuttered. It was for a neighborhood watch program online. "I ordered it a while ago. Just for emergencies." "You understand impersonating a federal officer is a federal offense, right?" he asked. Karen's whole body deflated. "I wasn't trying to impersonate anyone. It was just for neighborhood security. It's just a symbol." The two deputies looked at each other. The older one shook his head, then radioed something in. I didn't know what they were going to do next, but it was clear they were taking this seriously. My wife crossed her arms and stood silently, watching Karen unravel. At that point, more neighbors started gathering. Word spreads fast in an HOA-controlled neighborhood. People peeked from windows, a few stepped out with phones, and one even brought out a lawn chair like they were watching a free show. You could feel the shift in energy. This wasn't just Karen overstepping, this was Karen getting exposed. The same woman who'd sent passive-aggressive emails about lawn height and left sticky notes on trash bins was now being asked questions by deputies about a fake badge and a 911 abuse call. A man from down the street, I think his name's Rob, leaned toward me and whispered, "She really called the cops on your wife? For what? Shopping too hard?" I smirked but kept my eyes on Karen. She thought she was protecting the neighborhood. He snorted. "Looks like the neighborhood needs protection from her." The second deputy finally turned to Karen again. "At minimum, you made a false report to 911. At worst, you could face charges for impersonating a federal agent. You need to understand how serious this is." Karen's voice cracked. "I was just scared. I thought something wasn't right." My wife took a deep breath and replied, "If something doesn't feel right, you talk. You ask. You don't accuse people from across the street like you're in a spy movie. This isn't your TV fantasy, Karen. This is real life." Karen looked like she was about to cry, but she was still holding on to that last bit of pride. She turned toward the small crowd and tried to speak. "I'm only trying to look out for everyone's safety." But the neighborhood wasn't buying it anymore. You could see it in their faces, the doubt, the frustration, the quiet laughter. This time, she hadn't caught someone doing something wrong. She had exposed herself. The deputies stepped aside to talk quietly for a moment. Karen stood alone on the sidewalk, arms crossed now not in authority, but like she was trying to hug herself. The situation had gone far beyond her control, and she knew it. She had pushed too hard, played too many games, and now reality was crashing down right on her neatly trimmed lawn. My wife finally picked up the last of the groceries and walked them into the house, calm as ever. As if none of it surprised her. Karen didn't leave right away. Even after both deputies had clearly lost patience, she stood there like she still had something to prove. Her arms were crossed again, tighter this time. Her eyes darted around at the growing crowd of neighbors, probably realizing her grip on her little HOA empire was slipping with every passing second. The older deputy stepped back toward her. "We've already contacted dispatch," he said flatly. "They're reviewing the call log. Depending on what's recorded, this could go one of two ways for you." Karen blinked. "I told you, it was just a mistake." I really believed she was someone suspicious. The younger deputy raised an eyebrow. "You believed the woman unloading groceries at her own home, your neighbor, was a criminal?" Karen tried to double down. "I didn't recognize her. She looked different today. I've never seen her wear gym clothes before. It was unusual." That was the excuse she landed on. Gym clothes. The officer didn't even respond to that one. He just took a breath and turned away for a moment, clearly holding back whatever he really wanted to say. That's when Rob, same neighbor who whispered to me earlier, stepped forward. I don't know who Karen's been watching, but I've seen that woman jog in this neighborhood every Saturday. And she always parks right here. Karen whipped her head toward him. That's not your place to say. He cut her off. No. You made it my place the moment you called the cops on someone over almond milk and a watermelon. More neighbors nodded quietly behind him. People weren't just curious anymore. They were fed up. Karen had written violation letters about garden gnomes, threatened to fine families for sidewalk chalk, and once complained about someone's wind chimes being too spiritual. Everyone had their story. This was just the one that brought it all to the surface. You could see it in her face. She knew the tide was turning. But Karen wasn't someone who gave up easily. She glanced toward the younger officer, suddenly reaching for her phone. I have the HOA board on speed dial. They'll back me up. We take neighborhood security very seriously. The officer didn't flinch. You're welcome to call whoever you want. But that won't change the report we're filing. And it won't undo the misuse of emergency services. She froze mid-dial. Meanwhile, my wife stepped out again, this time holding a small black folder, her federal identification, along with a printed copy of our property deed. She handed them both to the deputies without a word. It was calm, collected, and impossible to argue with. The older officer took the documents, flipped through them, then gave her a nod. Thank you, ma'am. Everything checks out. Karen's eyes followed the folder like it was radioactive. She was watching her narrative crumble in real time. My wife finally spoke again, this time to the deputies. We've had multiple run-ins with her before. Petty things. But this is the first time she called in law enforcement and tried to pass herself off as federal. That changes everything. The younger officer gave a slow nod. We'll note that in the report, you have the right to file a formal complaint. She could face misdemeanor charges at the least. Possibly more. Karen's face went pale. Wait, I could be charged? Yes, the deputy said, matter of fact. Calling 911 under false pretenses is a crime. Presenting a badge, even a fake one, while making accusations to law enforcement. That's impersonation. Whether you meant it or not, it's serious. The air got even heavier. At that moment, Karen's husband, who no one had seen all morning, finally appeared at the edge of their driveway. He was wearing socks and sandals and looked like he'd just woken up from a nap. What's going on? He called out. Karen didn't respond. She just turned slightly, looking at him with wide eyes, as if silently pleading for help. But he stayed where he was, watching from a safe distance. One of the neighbors muttered, even he's not getting involved. A few others chuckled under their breath, but the mood was still tense. The officers continued taking notes. Karen stood alone. Her husband didn't step forward. Her neighbors weren't on her side. And her little HOA authority badge? That was now sealed in an evidence bag, sitting on the deputy's passenger seat. And in the middle of it all, the person she had tried to accuse was back to organizing the groceries she never got a chance to finish unloading. Calm, silent, powerful without ever raising her voice. And Karen? She was still standing there, surrounded by the wreckage of her own assumptions. It wasn't until the HOA board president showed up that things really got uncomfortable for Karen. Yes, that's right, Karen wasn't just acting on her own little fantasy. She'd actually pulled the entire HOA into this mess without telling them. Turns out, the board had no idea she owned a fake badge. No idea she'd been walking around pretending to be some kind of federal neighborhood watch enforcer. And definitely no idea she had called 911 on a resident over grocery bags. The board president, a soft-spoken man in his 60s named Mr. DeWitt, walked up slowly, clearly already aware something had gone wrong. You could see the tension in his jaw. He glanced at the police cars, then at Karen, who looked like a student caught cheating on an exam. Before he said anything, he looked toward my wife and said, "Ma'am, I just want to sincerely apologize for anything that may have happened here. You are a valued member of this community." My wife gave him a nod. "Thank you. But this didn't feel like it." Karen tried to jump in. "I was just protecting the neighborhood, Alan. There have been people coming through here who don't belong." Mr. DeWitt's expression hardened. "People like your neighbor?" A federal agent? Carrying a grocery bag? Karen opened her mouth, but he didn't give her time to speak. We've received 3 complaints this month about you threatening people with HOA citations over things like bird feeders and car washes. But today, he gestured toward the police cruiser. Today you crossed a line we can't ignore. The deputies stood nearby, quietly observing. They didn't need to say anything anymore. Karen's credibility was unraveling all on its own. I have authority as the HOA safety chair, she insisted, desperate now. This is what I'm supposed to do. You're supposed to report actual violations, Mr. DeWitt said firmly. Not fake emergencies. Not impersonate law enforcement. Not call 911 because someone was unloading bottled water from a Prius. The crowd of neighbors hadn't gone anywhere. In fact, a few more had joined. Some were recording. Some were shaking their heads. One elderly woman muttered, "She gave me a violation last year because I planted marigolds. Said they were too orange." Karen was spiraling now. You people don't understand the pressure I'm under. This neighborhood needs rules. We have a standard to uphold. Rob, the same guy from earlier, stepped forward again. You don't uphold anything. You just bully people. You fined my kid for having a lemonade stand. Remember that? Karen looked cornered, but still refused to back down. She turned toward the deputies again, trying to shift the story. She was disrespectful. She acted like she was above everyone. The older deputy raised an eyebrow. She didn't say a word. You were the one who brought out a fake badge and called in a false report. There's nothing in our notes that says she ever raised her voice. Karen froze. Mr. DeWitt sighed. Karen, the HOA has decided to suspend your position until further review. Effective immediately. Her mouth dropped. What? You can't do that. I've served this neighborhood for 7 years. And in 7 minutes, he replied, you just tore that reputation apart. The younger officer stepped in now. Ma'am, we'll need you to come to the station voluntarily to provide a statement. If you prefer, we can escort you. The words, escort you, hit her like a thunderclap. She looked around one last time, at the neighbors who no longer supported her, at the board president who just removed her, and at my wife, who still hadn't raised her voice once. Just calm. Controlled. Collected. Karen gave a tiny nod, barely audible. I'll go. As she walked toward the cruiser, she tried to keep her head up. But it was too late. The woman who once patrolled sidewalks with a clipboard and a phone was now being driven away, not because of some grand crime, but because she couldn't stand the idea of someone moving freely in their own home without her say. My wife finally turned toward me, expression still neutral, but with just the tiniest smirk. I knew what it meant. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just quiet victory, the kind that doesn't need an audience. Inside the house, our groceries were still waiting to be unpacked. But for once, the neighborhood drama had packed itself up. Or so we thought. The next few days were strangely quiet. Not just normal, peaceful quiet, but the kind that feels like everyone's holding their breath. Karen's house had its curtains drawn shut. Her porch lights, usually on a timer, stayed dark. No HOA emails, no printed warnings stuck to trash bins, no flyers in mailboxes reminding us about hedge trimming schedules or neighborhood watch protocols. It was like she'd vanished into her own silence. But the neighborhood? It didn't miss a beat. Neighbors who barely nodded before were suddenly striking up conversations. One guy even brought over a pie. Said he just wanted to make sure we were all right after the incident. My wife accepted it with a smile, but I could tell she wasn't surprised. That's the thing. When you've worked in high-stakes environments, you learn to recognize how people react under pressure. Karen cracked. Everyone saw it. And now, no one could unsee it. The best part? Nobody was scared of her anymore. By Tuesday morning, someone had started a group chat, not the official HOA one, but a new one. No Karen. It was casual, neighborly, and surprisingly full of memes. Someone dropped a gif of a watermelon getting scanned by airport security. Another joked about starting a grocery surveillance committee. And while the humor was light, the message was clear. Karen's reign was over. Midweek, a letter came in. Not an email, not a warning, An actual printed letter on HOA letterhead, signed by Mr. DeWitt himself. It was an apology to the entire neighborhood for what happened. It stated that recent events have caused unnecessary tension and assured residents that the board would review safety policies, clarify authority limits, and reinforce standards of conduct for HOA representatives. My wife read it once, nodded, and folded it neatly. "They're cleaning house," she said. "Not for us, for themselves." The funny thing was, Karen still lived there. But she was now just another resident. No title. No authority. Her power wasn't stripped away with a vote. It was taken the second she abused it in public, in front of witnesses, law enforcement, and her own neighbors. Still, people wondered what would happen next. Would she move? Would she fight back? Or would she just fade into the background? A few answers came sooner than expected. Thursday morning, a landscaping crew showed up at her house. Not her usual team, a new one. They trimmed everything down, cleared the overgrowth, even removed the obnoxiously huge, private property, a board president sign from her lawn. It had stood there for months like a warning flag. Gone in 5 minutes. That same day, she came out to water her plants. No clipboard, no sunglasses, no patrol posture. Just a tired look on her face and a plastic watering can. A few people noticed. Some waved politely. She didn't wave back. Meanwhile, my wife was doing what she always did, blending into the rhythm of normal life. She went for her morning jogs, walked the dog, and helped a neighbor with a stalled car battery. Every now and then, someone would ask her what she really did for work. "Just admin," she'd say with a wink. And that's all they needed to know. But there was still one thing left hanging, the official complaint. The sheriff's department had followed up, asking if we wanted to press further. They had everything they needed, the badge, the 911 recording, and the officer's statements. But my wife hesitated. Not because she wasn't serious, but because she was calculating what would come of it. "Do we want to make a headline?" she asked me one night. "Or do we want to make a point?" We talked about it for hours. There were pros and cons either way. On one hand, Karen needed consequences. On the other, she'd already faced a public undoing that was worse than any fine or probation. Her reputation was shot. Her position was gone. And in a small community like ours, that's the kind of punishment that sticks. Still, the decision wasn't easy. My wife sat on the back porch the next morning with a cup of coffee, just watching the neighborhood wake up. She watched kids ride bikes past Karen's house, watched a couple carry groceries into theirs, peacefully, without anyone calling 911. She didn't say much. But I could tell she was thinking about every little detail. Not just what happened, but what it meant. What it exposed. And why so many people, even now, still pretend to be something they're not, just to feel like they're in control of other people's lives. It wasn't long before Karen tried to make a comeback. Nobody expected her to stay quiet forever. In fact, the silence had almost made people forget how aggressive she used to be. But Karen? She wasn't built to disappear. Her ego wouldn't let her. And so, one afternoon, a week after the badge incident, she reappeared. Not just reappeared, but tried to reclaim her image. She posted a long message on the neighborhood bulletin board by the mailboxes. Not digital, a printed letter in a plastic sleeve, taped up like it was an official HOA announcement. She titled it Asterisk, a clarification from Karen. I didn't go out of my way to read it, but I didn't have to. Someone snapped a photo and shared it in the new group chat. It was full of excuses. Miscommunication, misjudgment. My genuine concern was misunderstood. But the part that got everyone talking was when she said, asterisk, as someone who has studied national security procedures extensively online, I felt a civic duty to act. That one line exploded the chat. People were quoting it, mocking it, even turning it into a meme. Rob changed his profile name to National Security Specialist. Someone else put up a fake Karen alert level scale, like it was a color-coded threat system. It went from green, no drama, to red, full-blown HOA meltdown. But behind all the jokes, the message was clear. Karen wasn't fooling anyone. Still, that didn't stop her. The next day, she tried to attend the HOA community cleanup. Not as a volunteer. As a leader, she walked in carrying a clipboard like nothing had happened, dressed in her old HOA polo shirt, acting like she was still in charge. But this time, no one followed her lead. Mr. DeWitt, the board president, gently pulled her aside. We didn't hear the conversation, but we saw it. She was waving her arms, whispering sharply. He just shook his head. Whatever he told her, it ended with Karen walking away from the group, red-faced, staring at the ground. She didn't pick up a single trash bag. Just got in her car and left. My wife watched all of this from the edge of the park. She didn't say much, just sipped her coffee like it was a Saturday sitcom. And to be honest, it kind of was. Except this show had real consequences. By that weekend, things escalated again, not publicly, but behind the scenes. Karen filed a complaint. Not against the HOA or the sheriff's department. She filed it against my wife. She submitted a formal letter claiming my wife intimidated her with federal status and made her feel targeted in her own community. That's right, the woman who called 911 over groceries and waved a fake badge was now trying to play the victim. She even attached screenshots of random security articles she'd printed off the internet to try and justify her past actions. We didn't find out through official channels. Nope, Rob's wife works part-time in the HOA office and quietly gave us the heads up. "You're not going to believe this," she said, almost laughing. She really thinks she can flip the story. But my wife? She didn't flinch. She simply printed her own copy of the original 911 call transcript, highlighted the part where Karen called her a possible burglar, and walked it over to the HOA office herself. No threats. No drama. Just the facts. And here's what happened next. The HOA board called a meeting. A closed-door one. Only core members, Karen, and a mediator. They reviewed both complaints, the police report, and the statements from neighbors. Nobody knew exactly what was said in that room, but the results spoke for itself. Karen's mailbox had a new notice the very next morning, a formal warning. It said she had violated HOA community conduct standards and was now barred from representing the association in any way. She would still be allowed to live in the neighborhood, but she'd lost every bit of influence she once had. She didn't post about it. She didn't argue. She didn't even try to tape up another letter. For the first time since we moved into that community, Karen was just another name on the street. But the neighborhood? It had changed. People weren't afraid to speak up anymore. They waved more, chatted more, helped each other out without worrying about getting reported. And every time someone walked by our driveway, they smiled, not because of what we did, but because of what we didn't do. We didn't fight fire with fire. We let the truth burn on its own.